My time hasn't started yet. She's going to have the clock going on me here right away. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to begin by acknowledging the territories and ancestors of the Kahnawake Mohawk peoples and thank them for allowing me to be here in their territory to engage in these important discussions with all of you. Thank you to the elder for the welcome this morning and opening our day in a good way. Miigwech. I'm a Cree person from Alberta, from Treaty 6. But I've lived most of my adult life in northern British Columbia, and I continue to live there, so make frequent trips home. But my children were born in the north in BC, and so I have a real affinity to that place as well. I feel really privileged to have been invited to witness with you the presentations and the words that were spoken today. And I want to thank the organizers for giving me that privilege. I have to say I was a bit, I don't know if overwhelmed is the word, maybe awestruck is a better word, with the presentations and all the wonderful knowledge that was shared today. It's not often you get to sit in a room with the kind of speakers that we got to hear today and get those gifts. I want to share a little anecdote with you as I was sitting with you listening, and I thought of this. This came into my mind, and it was a story told to me by Willie Ermine, a Cree elder, several years ago, and he talked about an elder and his grandmother. And when the elder was a little boy, he used to go out to the woods, into the hills with his grandmother and pick a lot of different kinds of medicines. And his grandma was very particular about which medicines she picked and how she picked them. And they would go out early in the morning and they would spend all day, and as the sun was starting to set, they would make their way home. And his grandmother lived in a little cabin out in the woods, and in that cabin, when they would come in, she would find, off in the corner was a white cloth, tablecloth, and she would lay that down. And it was always pristine. It was always absolutely white, clean, starched, all of that good stuff. And she would lay that tablecloth down, and she would lay those medicines down. And those medicines were to dry, so that she could use them for the people in the community there where she lived. Willie and I talked about that little story, and he told me, he said, you know, Margo, the purity of that white tablecloth is like the purity of our minds, and how those minds must be free to receive the knowledge and the information. They cannot be in discord. So that white tablecloth is like our minds when we're learning. And he said the medicines are the knowledge. And that knowledge is to help us to live in harmony. Not just the human kind, but all kind that inhabit this earth. So today I say to you, I think we got some good medicine. In that, I want to acknowledge each speaker and thank them for sharing their gift with us. They laid their gift down on that white tablecloth so that we could benefit, that we could come to understand, that we could connect to even one phrase of one story or one assertion or belief. We could connect to at least one thing. I believe that. Health is a really complex topic. Do you remember when you were a child and you used to get those kaleidoscopes and you could go like this when you were looking in them? Health is a bit like that. It's not a stagnant piece or something that we can just reach out and touch. It's ever moving. And it should be. It's about us. It's about our well-being. But I often think of that kaleidoscope as we try to seek solutions. I just about get it, and I just think I have it, and then it's gone. And there's another nuance that I learn. I come to a gathering like this, and I think, oh yeah, I never thought of that. I can adjust that. I can bring that into my knowledge. A rare gift that we've had. So my comments, the following comments that I want to make are really, I've tried to keep them to the theme of solutions to inequities for Indigenous health. So I tried to keep that in mind as I was frantically taking notes and trying to get it into my laptop. I also wanted to consider the needs of the group and answering a couple of simple questions. What are the solutions? I don't think we're going to walk away with a long list, this is it, and the checklist, and we can check it. That's not going to happen. That doesn't happen with kaleidoscopes. It's not happening. But we're going to have an idea. And how do we achieve them? Because it's really nice to hear all of this information. But so what? How do we change? How do we make the changes that we're all committed to, I think, in this room? So I offer some of the my comments in that regard and in that way. And of course, I've chosen things that I think that I believe are really important and that certainly have resonated with my work over the last several years. We heard a lot about context this morning, and I can't understate the importance of context, be it contemporary and historical, because we aren't just being without all that's around us, behind us, or in front of us. We heard about the new Liberal government, new relationships, commitments to Indigenous people. We heard about the UN Declaration and the full acceptance of that. We heard about truth and reconciliation, calls to actions. I was paying attention to you. and our responsibility in that regard. And also I was reminded of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the 20th anniversary. You know, I look back on that, and I've used that a lot in my studies and my own work, and I look back on that and I think to myself, you know, if we would have just done those recommendations, we may not have had the TRC. Never know. I heard a lot of principles, and all of these statements are meant to help us to move forward and to address Indigenous health. I heard a lot of principles, aspirations, and attributes, and some of those included. And we started with, we are all leaders, and we are all change agents. In whatever small and or large way we find ourselves, we are that. We are not stagnant. We are changing. Marlene reminded us in her comments, who is responsible for affecting change? Who is responsible? The federal government, the provincial government, First Nations, researchers, health practitioners? Who's responsible? I say to you that we all are. It's easy, though, to ask that question and put it out there, but that's not really us, right? But it is us. Marlene also encouraged us to acknowledge the power that each of us holds to affect that change. So in our positions, and we heard of many people doing that work from their positions, and I think that's really important. We have to acknowledge that we hold those positions, and how can we use them to affect positive change for all of us? This is about all of us. We are in relationship. And so it's about all of us. History can be reconciled. I was so happy to hear that. I had this little cheer squad rolling around in my head when I'd hear some of these comments. Yes! Reconciliation can be achieved and history can be changed. Transformation, we heard that throughout all afternoon. We heard about transformation. Look to the future. Yes, we are in this context, and yes, the past did happen, but we are not stagnant and we are not staying here. We are going to move forward together. And we're going to figure that out. There are many, many opportunities for change. As I listened throughout all of the comments, I thought, oh wow, you could just start picking those pieces apart and seeing the change that was coming. This was particularly evident in all of the comments from many of you, and that was when we're thinking about Indigenous health, nothing for us without us. So that speaks to our partnership. We're going to be in this together and doing it together. Some of our first relationships were anchored in respect, and we heard that from Malcolm this morning. And the values of peace and friendship forever. We might have been walking beside each other, but peace and friendship were forever. So you want to ask yourself, what does it mean to be a good friend forever? There's some unfinished business of confederation. We heard that this morning as well. Concepts of holistic health, where holism is understood when any singular phenomenon is better understood in the whole. Because then we know the context. I think I've been singing this song, out of this songbook for a long time. Every time I'm in an arena, I say we need to know the context. We don't need to dwell there. But we need to know it so we can understand today. And we need to learn from it so we can go to tomorrow. It is extraordinarily important. I don't think we can deconstruct down to a singular thing. We can look at it, and then we put it all back together. I really like this distinction. Dr. Smith made this. Think of possibility rather than vision, because possibility to me means action. Sometimes we can vision all kinds of things, but we don't really go there. So let's just get to it. Let's get to action. Let's say possibility. What is possible? Let's go there. Ooh, I better get moving here. I also like the notion of, and the metaphor that came with this. This is intergenerational work. This is like looking at that iceberg. We are preparing for the future. We are not there yet, but we are preparing for that. And it will take generations. I think I've learned that as I've gotten older. I'd say about 10 or 15 years ago, I'd be just stamping my foot and saying, let's make this change, and why isn't this happening, getting all revved up and crazy. But as maybe I've mellowed a little bit, I don't know, maybe I've got more impatient. But the fact of the matter is, it's not going to happen in my lifetime. But it might happen for those ones coming behind me. My sons may continue on with the conversation and continue to have these dialogues. But how do we set the table for that? What pieces can our generations put in place for those ones yet to come? And so how do we do that? And we heard some of those solutions as well today. And I think we cannot disregard and make an explicit effort to engage Indigenous knowledge in it, whatever we do. And I say that from an assumption place. I'll bet all of you hold this assumption. There are different systems of knowledge in this world. And they're explicit in diverse cultures. So we may have some similar thoughts, but how we come to those places may look differently. So keep that one in mind. I think that's I know it's a very important one, because for Indigenous people, as we define structures and processes, they are anchored in who we are, just as you are anchored in who you are. I think that's really important. I always I'm going to take a minute to talk about this. I just had a conversation with one of the participants that I'm always cognizant of individual versus collective when we're talking about transformation and change. Because individually we all have a role to play, and so do we collectively, and we constitute the collective. So there's that relationship between individuals and collective, and we need to deconstruct that. We need to think about what that looks like. I just spent 3 weeks ago, I just had the opportunity to spend some time with Willie Ermine. And he was talking to me about quantum physics. And he was talking about what he calls dancing particles. And what he was talking about, and he was talking about truth and reconciliation. And he says, Margo, it's going to happen at the cellular and quantum level. It happens there for us too. And I really believe that. So all of us, Indigenous and non-Indigenous folks, have individual responsibilities in this relationship, as do the collectives. And I'll talk some more specifically about that in a moment. I'm going to have to hurry up here. So then I thought about realizing. So how do we realize some of these principles and aspirations? And people talked about that in their presentations as well. They talked about change the mindsets of people. So we could look at Canada as a whole. How do we affect change at the societal level? It's a huge ask. It's one that will take time. Indigenous control of the health agenda. So we heard many, many people talk about this. Indigenous people having a voice, taking their voice. Sometimes we have to say to our communities, take your voice. Tell people, share your stories, share that information. I spend a lot of time in the health authority. A lot of people come into the system from outside in the communities. They don't know how the system works. It's a horrible jolt for them when they walk into Emerge or into the doc's office. This is like being in another world. We spend a lot of time just talking about what that system looks like and how it works, and how to interface with that. We need to spend equal time on the other side too, showing how community works. Because then we begin to understand each other, so we can reach that ethical space place that we heard about today. Grounding actions and ceremony, I think, is really a strong way of integrating Indigenous knowledge, and we heard about that. The co-production of knowledge. We will make this knowledge, if we think about Willie Ermine's ethical space, where two knowledge systems, two individuals come together. It's the place where change can happen. It's a place of innovation. It's a place of creativity, because if we lay our gifts down and we are honest with one another, and we are in that place with ethical values, then who knows what can happen. I truly believe we can co-create things together. There was also a strong recognition of the lack of current disaggregated data and lack of knowledge. I mean, those are practical pieces that we really need to get on the ground with. And so how do we use our ethics and our principles to gather that information? I think that's really important. We heard about creating new structures, and that knowledge is held in different ways. In the arts, in the stories, in the language. Do we have tools and metrics that measure that? What constitutes evidence is a question I've been grappling with for 12 years at the Collaborating Center. And I keep peeling back the onion, and I keep learning more. Every time I get a chance to be in a room like this, I learn more. And I keep thinking about it. Somebody talked, I think it was Robert, being human. And I think that gets back to that individual piece. How are we human? It's just not a system in an organization, but it's us who make that. I wanted to just say a couple things about relationship. And then I'll share just a couple of examples how I realized some of this in my own work. And I know that I didn't get everybody's wisdom on here, but I'm doing my best. Somebody posed the question, I think, at the most societal level, and it's one that I think we grapple with at an individual level as well. How do we engage with diversity and pluralism in this country? Because that happens all the time, right? We are all different. How do we engage in that? How do we address that? And I think, I pose these questions, but you probably have lots of answers. Even right now, is how do you deal with that? Because you face it all the time. I'm sure you have some answers. I pose this question at the Health Authority when I'm working with, in Northern Health, we have 8,200 employees. It's the smallest health authority in the province of British Columbia, but it covers the upper 2/3 of the province, so it's huge. Geographically, it holds the greatest proportion of Indigenous people in the north, and it's extraordinarily diverse. So we've been working on cultural safety and humility for probably since 2005. And in the last 3 years, we've really, I think, upped our game. But one of the things I say to people is, how can I challenge you to ask yourself this in your work, because, what are the takeaways, right? What does this mean for me tomorrow when I go to my job? What I heard all day today. I challenge people and I say to myself, how can I be the very best partner I can be? So I asked the 8,200 employees, what do you need to know to be the very best partner you can be? Some of that is simply self-reflection. I think, Jeff, in your presentation, you talked about who is my family, doing that family history work. All of us have that. We all live in a context. We all bring that with our gifts to the table. I say, get all the strengths out of all those gifts, because that's what we need. So I challenge people to ask themselves that. What do I need to do individually? I revisit my family histories. I self-reflect. What is it that I actually bring? Where's my motivation for this? And what does my organization need to do? So when I amp it up to the organizational level, I say, what does the organization need to do to be more respectful and to be a really good partner? What kinds of policies do we need to change? What kinds of structures do we need to have in place to encourage and engage diversity in a good way? And then I say, what does my community need to do? What do I need to share? What do I need to give? I think some of the tools of relationships that we heard people talk about today had to do with implementing cultural safety and humility. You heard Joe Gallagher talk about that. We've been doing that a long time in the North, and we'll continue that work. I can give you a long list of activities, but that's not what this presentation is about. That's a tool to help us walk together with respect and honor. Helps us to achieve ethical space. Changing our roles, I heard this, changing our roles from leaders to servers or facilitators, individually and collectively. So I've asked my CEO a couple of times, it's our job to care for people. It's our job to serve those who come to our doors. It's a different concept. It's not disregarding your gifts or your talents or your strengths, but it's positioning them in a different way. It's the same as we say we need different structures. We also need to have different orientations, attitudes, knowledge. And a commitment to actioning reconciliation, and I heard that strongly throughout the day. That we all want to be engaged in it. I didn't hear anybody put their hand up and say, I'm not doing this. I don't want to do this. I didn't hear anybody do that. So I'm assuming we're all here to do this. I have about 4 minutes left, so I'm just going to make a couple of comments on some of the work that I do that is relative to this. I want to make a comment. I guess for me, if I had to pick 2 words that stood out throughout the whole day, it would be relationship and transformation. Those would be the 2 words that I would pick out as I listened to all of you. So I want to make a comment about ethical space. Willie and I have talked about this a few times. I see ethical space as that really safe and respectful place, a place of innovation and possibility. I've already said that. It's a place where diverse individuals and systems can come together. And when we have our 2-eyed seeing, and I always imagine that photo because I've got this eye and I'm going to see this way, and I've got this eye and I'm going to see this way. But you know where all that gets mixed up is right here, because it all has to come in and be interpreted. So I look at that like, that's my ethical space in there. And I think about that a lot because I believe in the good and the realm of possibility and the commitment that I know people have to a better world. And I often go to that place, but we need tools to help us in that place. And that's what I was talking about a little bit earlier. But we build on our strengths. You know, lots of times, and it's really easy, we settle into, oh, here's all the bad things. And so you build this mindset that it's all bad, and I heard that today too. But it's not. I think we need to look for the strengths. We need to explicitly look for that. And we need to use all of those gifts. The one thing, I heard a lot of values, but I just want to share a little anecdote. I have a friend, she was actually my supervisor, Dr. Joanne Archibald. And she always talks about one hand to the future and one hand to the past. And here we are in the present, right? And she would always talk about, I reach back to the past for those values that have passed through time. Sharing, caring, love, humility, hope. This is a time of hope. And so I think if we bring those values from the past to the present, and if that was my touchstone every time I designed a project, and they are at the Collaborating Center, and I don't have time to go into all of that. But if I had those values, I'd be saying, how does this project show caring? How does this project share? If those were our touchstones, I think we are in the realm of possibility. I have 1 minute left, and I promised I'd be on time. I guess in my final word, I would like to say that I hope that I've covered some of the themes that you heard today. I hope that there was one phrase or one story that you can take into your life and make a change. And I thank you for listening to me, and I thank you for giving me this privilege to hear you. Miigwech.